So, welcome to the Capricorn new moon forecast. And this is the first of these forecast workshops that I'm offering in the new year, 2021. It feels almost surreal to say that the year 2020 has been so dominant in our experience and our consciousness. And here we are in 2021. And lo and behold, the world has not gone back to normal by any means, but that what unfolded in such unusual ways last year is very much carrying forward into this new year. And so, what we'll be looking at this evening will be really what is unfolding um, during this next lunation cycle. And we have a really potent set of transits to look at. It's a lot of information because the transits are um, so complex and in kind of mutually activating. And that'll make more sense as I go further along. There's just day after day is all these very exact hits of transits that are um, lighting up the sky in quite extraordinary ways. So we'll be looking at the arc of this lunation, and it feels really special that we actually get to meet on this new moon. Sometimes I will offer this workshop the day before or a couple days before, just due to scheduling. But when we can have it on the new moon, that feels really potent because we're coming together within these energies of the conjunctio of solar and lunar, these celestial lights in our solar system. And as they conjoin, it's like this reset, and it's the end of an old cycle and the beginning of a new. And it's this monthly rhythm that we all experience in different ways. We experience it in our bodies. Women especially experience it in their bodies, but all of us, human beings, the animal world, the plant world, moves with the rhythms of the dance between the sun and the moon. So, to give you an overview of what I will be covering, there's a structure that I've developed of first kind of taking in the broader picture of what's happening collectively, and then moving through the lunation cycle. And so, the lunation cycle, for those who are less familiar perhaps with that term or who are new here, the lunation cycle is the cycle between the sun and the moon when they come into aspect or geometrical relationship with each other. And so that's particularly the quadrature angles of the new moon when they're conjoined, the waxing quarter moon when they're at a square 90-degree angle, the full moon or an opposition 180-degree angle, and then the waning square, the next 90-degree angle, finally closing with the new moon. Now, in the lunation cycle, we also have soft aspects, just to get a little more technical. We have the trine, 220-degree angles that take place between the sun and the moon during the course of that cycle on either side of the full moon, and then two sextiles, 260-degree angles that take place on either side of the new moon. And so they're all evenly spaced around each other. It happens every month. And so that's our scaffolding. But what shifts are the other transits, the other planets that are coming into alignment with the sun and the moon, and also with each other. And so once I've kind of gone through that major scaffolding of the lunar cycle, speaking to the really significant transits that land on, say, the new moon or the waxing quarter or the full moon, and there's a lot of them this month. Some months, we just have the new moon, but there's no exact alignments on that day. It seems like every part of the lunation cycle this time is host to multiple exact alignments, which I think is part of what gives this upcoming month such a feeling of potency. Of when I was preparing for this and writing these transit updates that I usually do, I was just blown away by the beauty and the power of what we're seeing unfolding in the heavens right now. And so I really kind of feel in awe just even reporting about these dynamics, but they're complex. It's not a simple time as I think we all understand and feel within ourselves. Um, and so the last portion will be me looking at some of the other major transits that are unfolding this month. So, transits from Venus, transits from the sun to other outer planets, and so forth. Ingresses, a retrograde that makes it in there. And if you are really familiar with astrology, I hope you can just kind of drink this all in, take notes, jot down the dates. And if you're newer to astrology, then, well, this is a new language. And sometimes the best way to get to know a new language is just to be immersed in the dialogue around it. And so it's okay if you don't understand everything. This is where astrology really calls on your intuition. And um, if this is your first time here, and maybe you'll be joining me in future workshops, the words will start to become familial actually feels kind of right, the little slip of the tongue I had there, because these planetary archetypes really do in some ways become family, or rather we recognize them as family as we get to know them. So because it's a new year, and I see many new faces, I feel like I should give a new introduction of myself. So I've been offering these workshops through Ouroboros in Nevada City since last April of 2020. And we have a bit of a shift going on as there's the development and the launching of this beautiful new organization, the Academy of Oracle Arts. And so that is who's now hosting this workshop. And so if you're new because you're coming in through that stream, I just want to briefly introduce who I am. And for those who already know me, well, you can just, I guess, listen. So my name is Becca Tarnas, and I'm an archetypal astrologer, meaning that the kind of astrology I do brings in an understanding of archetypes, that each of the planets is associated with an archetypal principle. And that can be understood in the sense of like a mythic deity. It can be understood in the sense of a Platonic form or idea, if we're looking all the way back to the philosophy of Plato in Greece. It can be understood as these psychological principles that someone like Carl Gustav Jung, the founder of analytical psychology and the depth psychology tradition, speaks to. Astrological archetypes are all of those, like transcendent forms and these deep psychological principles or figures. And they're abstract and also deeply personal at the same time. And so my background is in um, Jungian studies and depth psychology, also in philosophy, particularly the philosophy of imagination. And my work at this point is as a counseling astrologer and as a teacher. I teach both at Pacifica Graduate Institute and also at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And archetypes and astrology are definitely major features in what I teach. So I now want to turn toward looking at what some of the major transits are that we're currently in the midst of before I go into looking at the lunation cycle. In 2020, we had one really dominant alignment that we strongly experienced, and this was a triple conjunction. So, an alignment of three planets, all visibly right next to each other, of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. Now, Pluto only would be visible there with a telescope, but Jupiter and Saturn we could see, and I hope all or most of you were able to see the exact conjunction on the winter solstice, December 21st. I'm so glad I got to see it. on the solstice. I went out looking the day before and it was cloudy, and just stayed knowing, and as long as I could until I knew it had set, and then was like, okay, I've missed it. That's Saturnian disappointment. But then I remembered, well, when you have Jupiter and Saturn together, the good and the bad get balanced out. And if you're met with disappointment, there's a good chance that something Jupiterian, some blessing, some gift will come through it to counterbalance the Saturnian um, lack. And sure enough, the next night, beautiful clear sky, twinkling stars, and I was able to see the exact conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. So um, that was just such an amazing blessing. We won't see those two planets in a conjunction for another 20 years, and they won't be as close as they were this time for who knows how long. I would have to check with the astronomers on that one. So these three planets really dominated the zeitgeist throughout 2020. And the Saturn Pluto part of that triple conjunction is what correlated with the major crises that we experienced from, of course, the coronavirus pandemic and the economic fallout of all of the lockdowns, the sense of being imprisoned and isolated with all of the quarantines, being cut off from others, and really a sense of like, this is never ending, like, or when is this going to end, and the feeling of kind of being squeezed. We can also see the Saturn Pluto in the various political and cultural and social tensions. We can see the Saturn Pluto in the protests against police brutality last summer. And we can see the Saturn Pluto unfolding right now, too, in terms of the ongoing political crises. Now, there's other factors that are involved there as well that I'll bring in, but Saturn Pluto is our base node. So that's why I always come back to that and speak to it, because it's the longest lasting of the current alignments. Saturn and Pluto started to conjoin in 2018, and they will be with us through the end of this year, 2021. So anytime I'm talking about other faster moving transits, always keep in the back of your mind that Saturn Pluto deep rhythm, and looking back through times in history that Saturn Pluto were in alignment, as many of you have heard me talk about before, both world wars, 9/11, the Great Depression, the Great Recession, and so forth. Now, layered onto that deep base node of Saturn and Pluto was Jupiter. Jupiter was in the mix all year, amplifying, magnifying, globalizing the crisis effects of Saturn Pluto, but also offering us some hidden blessings. And the good news in the darkness, the hope through the difficulty, the little successes that um, it, I was able to catalog all year, speaking with different clients and students, and people really finding a sense of hope and gratitude and a recognition of what really matters in the midst of this difficulty. And so Jupiter offers its blessings at the same time as it kind of makes the situation worse. And so, what has been happening since the exact conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn is these three planets have started pulling apart. Jupiter and Saturn moved into the sign of Aquarius, while Pluto's still in Capricorn. Now, they're still all very active with each other. Being in different signs isn't keeping them from being highly activated, but they're starting to pull apart. Jupiter and Saturn are still very close, though, as we speak. But what's now coming in is that Jupiter Saturn square conjunction, which has so much to do with, again, balancing out harm with good. It has to do with justice, with the law, with kind of bringing to trial, and which, again, these are themes that we're seeing, for example, in the political arena. But that Jupiter Saturn conjunction is square to the planet Uranus. And Uranus is the principle of change, revolution, rebellion, awakening, liberation. And so Saturn and Jupiter are square at a 90-degree angle to Uranus. Now I'll pull up the charts once we start moving through the lunation cycle, so I'll point these all out. But I just want to kind of speak to it first before pulling up those charts. Now, the thing you need to know about Uranus, this change maker, this change agent, is that Uranus had been square to Pluto, the deep underworld transformative power drive. Uranus and Pluto had been square each other since 2007. And that Uranus-Pluto square, which correlated with all the major revolutionary changes of this last decade, mirroring the 1960s, mirroring the French Revolution, which are other time periods when Uranus and Pluto came into alignment, that Uranus-Pluto square really just came to an end at the close of 2020. Now, I think because there are so many other planets connected to those two right now, that we're still feeling some lingering vestiges of Uranus-Pluto. Things certainly still feel very revolutionary, but the flavor's changing, and it feels like the flavor's changing quickly. And that's very much the nature, particularly of Jupiter square to Uranus. So that Jupiter square Uranus really just started tightening into the orb of influence last month in December. So not that long ago. And when you bring Jupiter and Uranus together, now remember, Uranus is that awakener, that trickster, that liberator, that rebel, and Jupiter comes in and amplifies it, makes it bigger, grants it success. There's this soaring toward the heights quality with Jupiter Uranus, taking flight. It's like Icarus in the Greek myth, flying up toward the sun, reveling in that freedom and that flight through the air. But if you know the myth of Icarus, that youthful Peter Pan-like puer quality can sometimes fly too close to the sun and get burned and come crashing down. And so part of the dynamic that we're also seeing in this very kind of expansive, wow energy of the Jupiter Uranus is Saturn right there, good old Saturn, holding the reins, pulling in the constraint, the restriction, the reality principle, putting up barriers to that Jupiter-Uranus impulse for change and ascendance. And so that whole dynamic, Jupiter-Saturn square Uranus, it's like this sudden uplift toward change that's being pulled back at the same time. And so what starts to happen is there's cracking. And so we see the sudden cracking of old structures. There's the crumbling of things that we thought would endure decades, centuries, things that can endure the test of time, feel like they're breaking or anything can happen. The Jupiter Uranus is the part that's like anything unexpected can occur. And Saturn is both what is attempting to stop that and pull the reins in, and also the very principle that's being cracked apart. So it's extremely volatile. And we're looking in terms of first the Jupiter Uranus. That Jupiter Uranus will move pretty fast. We're really going to feel it this month, January, February, March. They're going to start to pull apart later in the year. They will come closer within 9 degrees later this year, but we're not going to feel it in the same way as we are in these next couple months. The Saturn Uranus, on the other hand, the Saturn Uranus is carrying forward through 2023. So we're really in it with Saturn Uranus. We've been so deeply steeped in Saturn Pluto the last couple years, but especially last year. And so the winds are changing. We're moving from Saturn Pluto to Saturn Uranus. And it's that the tension and crack up of Saturn Uranus really can feel like the sudden breakdown of old familiar structures. And interestingly, this is one of the Now, this isn't me making a concrete prediction. This is just me looking back in history. But there was a Saturn Uranus alignment in the sky when the Civil War in the US started in 1861. And so we are seeing a lot of those energies in the States right now in terms of intense partisan division. And that at least historically, there is a relationship between um, the Civil War in the US and the energies that are present right now. And it really, a lot of the quality of Saturn Uranus is like walking a knife edge, because Uranus is that unpredictable principle that can either be um, balanced out by Saturn or made more problematic by Saturn. So this speaks to the multivalence, the multifaceted expression of archetypes, where we actually see all of these different manifestations coming through simultaneously, um, and that you, whatever your own um, let's say political position or opinions are, what I hope you can see with your archetypal eye in hearing these astrological correlations is that this describes all sides of what we're seeing. That these archetypes manifest in these various avenues simultaneously and in complex ways. And that's really where the invitation is to participate, to recognize our own conscious engagement with these archetypal principles, because they are manifesting simultaneously in so many ways. And so, what we have to contend with is, yes, we know that Jupiter Saturn is square Uranus. We know that's here. But how do we choose to participate in it? What parts of Saturn do we most want to bring forward? Do we want to bring forward the sense of responsibility and maturity and the wisdom of experience? Or do we want to bring forth um, a kind of punitive, punishing, uh, more negatively oriented expression? Do we want to respond from fear? These are questions to sit with. Those are all Saturn, everything I just described. With Uranus, do we want to uh, live Uranus in terms of awakening, awakening to, I can already hear the Saturn coming through, awakening to reality, which is Uranus Saturn. It's very hard to speak about archetypes in isolation because they constantly call each other in. But with Uranus, do you want to experience it as awakening, as um, as liberation of all peoples? Or do we want to experience it as um, kind of a rebellious, adolescent, youthful, untempered energy? Like again, those are all expressions of Uranus. Um, and in every moment, we have a choice in how we participate in these archetypal energies. So finally, the last thing I will say about the larger world transit dynamics before getting into the specifics of this month is that, just in case that wasn't enough, dear Cosmos, Mars, the god of war, the principle of fire and anger and violence, the capacity to take action, is conjunct Uranus. Not only is it conjunct Uranus, it moved from the last degree of Aries into the sign of Taurus on January 6th, the day that the insurrection started in the Capitol. So that change of signs, Mars bridged between its own home sign of Aries, the last degree of it, into Taurus. But the moment it moved into Taurus, it started to approach Uranus very quickly. That alignment, as we'll be looking at in more detail, will perfect on January 20th, the US's inauguration day. I've definitely been sitting here with these transits and these dates and just feeling like there is an orchestration beyond what we human beings can conceive. And again, that's while sometimes it may feel like, well, this is just the hand of fate, surrender to it, we have no control. I personally see that again as that call to participate, to co-create, to learn how to dance with these energies. Um, because Mars conjunct Uranus is volatile. It's the sudden upwelling and explosion of at least the potential of violence, um, and anger kind of reaching an explosive level. And having that square Jupiter, having that square Saturn, um, these really are some of the most um, firecracker explosive energies that can all be put together. And they are peaking this month. So this is the world, this is the archetypal zeitgeist we are living through at this moment. And I was speaking with my dear friend and colleague Laura Machete about this Mars Uranus alignment. And I said, well, what is a positive way at a collective level to channel Mars Uranus? Like at a personal level, um, you can definitely move it through your body. Go for a run, go for a bike ride. Maybe be a bit careful when you're driving your car. Um, don't get on that motorcycle. But you can kind of temper it at the personal level. And she had a wonderful response. She said, well, maybe it looks like rebelling Uranus against violence. And I really liked that answer that she brought up. What does it mean to rebel against violence or against anger? That is the liberation that we're finding. Can we liberate ourselves from being consumed by anger and find some other channel for those energies? So all of that being laid out, I'm now going to share the transits for the lunation cycle as they are unfolding. So let me just pull up the chart of the moment. And so what we see here, this is the chart of today, the Capricorn new moon. It's set for 9 p.m. Pacific time, which is when the exact new moon will take place. And look at this lineup. Here is the new moon, moon conjunct sun in Capricorn within 1 degree of Pluto. So not only is it the new moon today, the beginning of the new cycle, all of those luminary energies are focused directly on Pluto. Pluto, the archetype of intensity and extremes, of the depths of the underworld, it's like the broiling cauldron of the instincts, are all being directly focused on, highlighted, and felt. Um, Tomorrow, is it tomorrow? I believe it's tomorrow, or 2 days, that's what it is. On January 14th, that the sun will make its exact conjunction with Pluto. And so even more, we will feel that intensity of the sun Pluto conjunction, where the sun and Pluto have a really interesting relationship. The sun as the center of the solar system, the planet, or in this case, it's not a planet, but the celestial body we name first, and then Pluto, the furthest out of the solar system. And that the sun and Pluto are like the hero and the dragon facing off with each other. But it's also the hero facing its shadow. And Sun Pluto is as much the descent of the ego as the willing sacrifice of the heroic self. So this is what's shaping this new moon energy and going forward over these next few days, especially with the perfection of the Sun Pluto alignment on January 14th. And as you can see, there's just this massive stellium crossing between these two signs: Moon, Sun, Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mercury, all lined up here. And Venus, also in Capricorn, is catching up with the whole thing, as we'll see later in the month. And here's the square. There's the Mars-Uranus conjunction, forming that very tight square to Saturn and Jupiter, and Mercury, actually. Mercury really being in there in terms of a lot of revelations, like Mercury square to Uranus, sudden, unexpected revelations, even maybe with Saturn there of an unpleasant nature, unexpected realizations. How much is just the news, media, Mercury is dominating right now as well. I know for me personally, I've been getting better at, not being too much on social media, focusing my energy more inward, writing more, and then January 6th hits, and suddenly I'm doom scrolling along with, it feels like at least the whole country, if not much of the world. So going forward from the Capricorn new moon, which is so potent, um, there's a couple other alignments actually that perfect right now. Um, One is the Saturn Mars square makes its exact alignment tomorrow. Um, Mars has been squaring the Jupiter Saturn Pluto stellium basically since August. Um, Mars swept across, squaring those three planets in August. We saw how literally fiery August and September were. Then it turned retrograde in September, swept back across those planets. And then, because these three planets have been moving further apart in these last several weeks, it's taking longer. Mars isn't just hitting them in succession by within a few days, like in October. It's spread out more by a few weeks. So Mars was really tightly square to Pluto right around the solstice. It perfected on the 23rd of December. And so it's tomorrow that Mars makes its exact final square to Saturn. It'll be a little bit further on that it makes the exact alignment to Jupiter. That takes place. Let me see. Um, That takes place on January 22nd. So you can see they're a little bit more spread out, but not too much. I mean, it's only 10 days between them. Um, so Mars with Saturn, it Saturn is trying to contain that Martian fire and energy, which it can do to a certain degree when it's exact, but the fact that both Jupiter and Uranus are there amplifying and exploding Mars makes Saturn's job harder when it comes to containing. So it really does make all of these energies very crunchy and frustrating and grinding. And it's like I had this image of like a mortar and pestle kind of just grinding these energies together. And then the other alignment that perfects tomorrow, just on the heels of the new moon, is this Venus trine to Uranus. And Mars is still within orb. And this may be a little bit of the saving grace right now, because one, it's trine, softer angle, and also because it's Venus. And Venus brings in the heart, brings in love. And so it can be the unexpected love, the unexpected friendship or connection, the Venus Mars dynamic. It's like the classic archetypal lovers. Um, so, if you're home and you're worrying about the state of the world, maybe take 5 minutes and put on a song that you really love and just dance your heart out and move some of the energy that way, and honor Venus and what she's trying to do in trining Mars and Uranus at this time. So moving forward now to the waxing quarter moon, we can see this will take place on January 20th. So as I mentioned, this is the US's inauguration day, and that waxing quarter moon, the moon right in the first degrees of Taurus, square to the sun, which just ingressed into Aquarius the day before. So January 19th. Um, the moon square the sun it's the opening of the lunation cycle. It's really when those energies start to be more in a sense of tension. That's the nature of the square. They're in tension with each other. And I think we're going to feel that tension between the sun and the moon just rippling through all these other transits that we're experiencing, particularly that Mars Uranus conjunction that I talked about, that, as you can see, also perfects that day. They're at the exact degree and minute. And the moon is right there with them. So, the moon, again, relating to the emotions and the feelings, the family, the home, the homeland, the sense of belonging. Um, and I have a feeling that this will be a very emotionally volatile day, in a lot of different ways. Because, as you can see, the moon's also going to be square to Saturn, square to Jupiter, a lot of feelings, a lot of impulse, maybe even to retreat into those feelings. So really take care of yourself, uh, and your emotional psychological state, um, through this whole time, of course, but just seeing how that's really coming through on that day. So then, moving forward again to our full moon in Leo. um, the full moon in Leo is still contending with a lot of these same dynamics that I've been describing. As you can see, Mars and Uranus are still quite close with each other. They're still both square to Saturn and Jupiter. But I'm really wondering if we're going to start to feel something shifting here, in these last days of January, because there's an exact Sun Jupiter conjunction that takes place right around then. And so, the Sun conjoining Jupiter really focuses the energy. It highlights Jupiter, that sense of joy, that sense of success, of abundance, of joviality, of a positive outcome. Um, and with that exactly opposite the moon, and the moon in Leo, I just had this image of like this lunar lion roaring in a kind of sense of celebration, and uh, that joyful, benevolent element that Jupiter brings in. But that moon opposite Sun Jupiter isn't alone. It is T squaring um, Mars and Uranus. So those fiery, volatile energies are by no means gone from the picture. The other alignment that perfects on this day, on the full moon, is this Venus Pluto conjunction. So Venus now is starting to enter into, crossing through all of these different planets, and so the conjunction with Pluto is the first one. Now, Venus conjunct Pluto is like Beauty and the Beast. It's like Persephone and Hades. It's it's the underworld lover. It's the demonic lover. It's the senses and sensuality and sexuality being expressed in these rich, dynamic, underworld, taboo, dangerous, edgy ways. There's something just deeply erotic about Venus Pluto. And um, it also can be understood as Pluto can be seen as empowering the Venusian. So empowering relationality, empowering. Now, I don't often make these very gendered associations, but you can see it actually as like empowering women, for example. Venus Pluto coming through in that way. And so these very um, richly colorful qualities will be coming through simultaneously with that full moon. So if you are setting intentions tonight with this new moon, these will blossom at this Leo full moon with the Sun, Jupiter, the Venus, Pluto. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how this full moon feels, because there is this kind of uh, rich quality of culmination that feels very present with this particular alignment, this particular full moon. And as you may be noticing, We're not just getting full moon, waxing quarter, new moon, etc., on their own. You can see like each one is really defined by these other planetary alignments, like the Venus Pluto happening with the Sun Jupiter at the full moon, and that Mars Uranus still there. So now coming forward again to the waning quarter moon, you can see the moon here in the square to this the sun, um, which is still within orb of Jupiter. Now the moon at this point, now if you remember with the full moon, they were forming a T square this way to Mars and Uranus. Now they're forming a T square this way. And with the waning quarter moon, the moon is in Scorpio. So this traditionally is seen as um, the the sign of the moon's fall. The moon struggles to express fully in Scorpio, and being in the opposition to Mars, having just made the opposition to Uranus, and also forming this T square to all of these planets that are just stacked up in Aquarius, the moon itself may be feeling quite volatile. So, again, bringing that to the embodied experience, the emotions. My plan on this day is I'm going to just devote as much of that energy as I can to scrubbing my house clean. This is always the advice that I give for Moon Mars alignments in particular. Take that Martian energy, take all that. That volatile fire that you might be turning toward, a family member who's irritating the hell out of you, and instead, get your broom out, get the scrub brushes out, and just cleanse your home space, because the moon is also the home. And turn instead that energy towards service of home, space, self, and others. So finally, coming to the last part of this cycle, we come to the Aquarius new moon. And there are so many planets in Aquarius at this point that in my program, you can see the 10th house. Now, this is the 10th house because the new moon perfects at 11:06 in the morning in California, at least, or on Pacific time. So you can see, as it's all trying to fit into Aquarius in the 10th house, the program has had to expand the boundaries of the house to get the midheaven and Saturn and Jupiter and Venus and Mercury, which is retrograde at this point, and the sun and the moon all in there. So there is so much Aquarian energy that is definitely present at the Aquarius new moon, but also leading up to it. You can just see in all of those charts I've been showing, Aquarius is full. And Aquarius is the sign of the water bearer. It is an air sign. It is a fixed sign. It is where the sun dwells in the heart of winter. It is cold and airy and aloof. It is ruled traditionally by Saturn, although modern rulership is given to Uranus. How paradoxical. And we have a Saturn-Uranus square in the sky right now. So kind of hard to differentiate those energies anyway. And so what we are seeing here is such an emphasis on that Aquarian quality. And there was something that I wanted to speak to, because when the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction took place in the first degree of Aquarius, there rumors rippled through the world that this was the beginning of the age of Aquarius. So I just wanted to say a few things about what the age of Aquarius actually refers to. It doesn't actually refer to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction taking place in Aquarius, although that does initiate a larger cycle of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions every 20 years taking place in air signs for the next about 240 years. So it also doesn't refer to that, although it is the beginning of a new age, you could say. The age of Aquarius refers to the precession of the equinoxes. And so the sun rises in front of a different sign that changes every about 2,500 years, 2,000 years. And It takes 26,000 years for the sun to shift what sign, to shift fully, or to move through all of the constellations. Um, let me see how I'm describing this. Basically, the first day of spring, the sun currently rises in front of Pisces, and at the very end of Pisces, it's really close to switching to being in front of Aquarius. And this is what is referred to as the precession of the equinoxes. Before Pisces, the sun at the beginning of spring was rising in front of Aries. And actually, this is when the tropical zodiac, which is what I use in my astrology practice and what is often used in Western astrology, the tropical zodiac was set when the sun was rising in front of Aries, which is why the sun moves into Aries, ingresses into Aries at the spring equinox. So that's the tropical zodiac. But the sidereal zodiac tracks the fact that, well, this whole thing is shifting because the Earth has a 23.5 degree wobble, or it's at an angle and then it wobbles along that. And so we are at this kind of threshold point of the sun shifting from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And that term, the age of Aquarius, from the research that I've looked at least, actually, Carl Jung was one of the people who really first brought that term and our understanding of it to the fore through his Red Book experiences. But he's drawing on insights from theosophy and various traditions that are informing his ideas. And of course, this long, deep understanding of the precession of the equinoxes. But in terms of the age of Aquarius, as we hear about it sung in the musical Hair, it's not the way Jung described the age of Aquarius wasn't all love and light as we see presented by the musical Hair, or certain ways of describing what the age of Aquarius is supposed to be. For Jung, it actually, that shift into the age of Aquarius looked much more like a time of crisis and dissolution of old structures. In a lot of ways, what we are seeing now, which is interesting. But the reason I'm defining all of this is just to differentiate the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at the beginning of Aquarius from the age of Aquarius. And there's a lot of debate about when the age of Aquarius actually starts. Certain people have given exact years, like 1940. Some people say it won't even start for 800 years from now. So anywhere from 1940 to 800 years from now is about when it could begin. And the reason it's not precise is because the constellations are all different sizes. So there isn't a marker in the sky with 30 degrees per sign like we have in this beautiful chart up against the constellations. So that's why it's ambiguous when exactly the age of Aquarius is beginning. But I did want to just speak to some of what Jung said the age of Aquarius was about, because really the core of the age of Aquarius, from his understanding, was that it was a shift from looking to some external hero or savior for our spiritual salvation. And he saw the end of the age of Pisces really as the end of the age of Christ. Now, of course, we have to situate this within a Judeo-Christian Western perspective. That's where Jung is speaking from. So acknowledging that, but that's what he was contextualizing it within. And then the shift to the age of Aquarius, which feels much more universal, is that each person is taking on their own spiritual burden, no longer looking to a Christ or any other external figure, but rather looking inward to yourself to be your own savior, to be your own hero, to carry your own spiritual and soul burden. And that's what we see in the symbolism of the water bearer who bears the water, the spiritual waters, on his or her back or shoulders. And so this is an image to sit with as we see all of these planets move through Aquarius. So I'm going to stop sharing the chart and just speak a little bit more to some of the key transits of this month. Um, I'll just kind of be throwing the dates out there so you can jot them down. But this is a good moment for me to also say that now some of you I know are quite familiar with this, but I write these monthly transit updates. I send them out on my mailing list. I post them on my website, which is beccatarnas.com. And then I also, if you follow me on any social media accounts, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, I post them on the day that the alignment is taking place. And so if you go to my website, for example, you can see the whole month ahead with the exact dates and times of when these different alignments perfect. Now, and you can use it in a variety of ways. You can print it up and put it next to your calendar, and you can use it to plan your month, or you can use it as a kind of journaling retrospective tool, which can be really helpful. Um, the caveat that I always want to give around using these is that even though I'm giving the exact date and time of when the alignment happens, depending on what planets are involved, you need to expand the time that it's in effect. So, for a transit from the moon, it's going to last several hours. Transit from the sun, well, that's going to last actually about 10 days, 5-degree orb in, 5-degree orb out. Same goes for Mercury and Venus, about 10 days. Mars, a little bit longer, several weeks. Now, once we reach Jupiter, um, we're looking at months here. Saturn, Uranus, Pluto, Neptune, they're all in the order of years. So when you read these alignments, know that this isn't just active on the day that I'm describing it for. It's most potent then, but you're going to be feeling it before, you're going to be feeling it after. And if you want to get really into it, you can kind of map this out in your calendar as a way to, see the archetypal waveform come in and move out. So just to touch on a few of those transits before we open up for dialogue. The Sun and Venus will both conjoin each of the planets in that Capricorn Aquarius stellium. I mean, at this point, it's basically just an Aquarius stellium, but I'm keeping Capricorn in there because Pluto's still in Capricorn, and be squaring that Mars Uranus. So the Sun and Venus are just lighting up that part of the chart that we were looking at. It's like this gauntlet of intensified energies. So I already mentioned the Sun will conjoin Pluto on January 14th. That happens to be the same day that Uranus turns direct. Now Uranus is retrograde for half the year, direct for half the year. So this isn't the same as like a Mercury retrograde, but it's just worth noting that it's turning direct. So it's stationed at the degree 6 degrees Taurus. So if you have a planet right around 6 degrees Taurus or any of the fixed signs, you're probably really experiencing that Uranian change-oriented, liberating, awakening energy in some kind of way. So the Sun basically moves the conjunction with Pluto, emphasizing those depths, the underworld on January 14th. Then it conjoins Saturn next on January 23rd, emphasizing like hard realities and consequences, judgment, difficulty, the endings of things. Things get serious when the Sun conjoins Saturn. That's January 23rd. Just 3 days later, the Sun squares Uranus. So again, the Sun's just emphasizing this tension between Saturn and Uranus, the old Saturn and the new Uranus. The structure, Saturn, and then the change, Uranus. So the Sun squares Uranus on January 26th, really emphasizing those liberatory energies. Just 2 more days later, the sun conjoins Jupiter on January 28th. Um, this is the same day as the Leo full moon and Venus conjunct Pluto. So that was the one we looked at the chart of. And so bringing the sun's kind of highlight, focus, direction, agency toward that more Jupiterian, expansive, jovial, benefic quality. And then finally, the sun will square Mars on February 1st. So then turning that focus more toward the warrior, toward anger, toward violence, toward taking action, activism, and so on. That happens to be the same day that Venus ingresses into Aquarius. So that's when the whole, more than half the pantheon is all stacked up in Aquarius. Or I guess it's half the pantheon, 5 of them. Now, Mercury, this is just a brief little note on Mercury. Mercury isn't doing as much as, say, the sun is doing throughout this month, because the sun is just sweeping through all those outer planets that we've been talking about. What Mercury so kindly offers us is it's turning retrograde in Aquarius on January 30th. So, Mercury retrograde, last year was all in water signs. This year it's moving all into air signs, because that's what Mercury retrogrades do. They happen 3 times a year for 3 weeks at a time in one element. So all trine each other. So air sign retrogrades. And as with all Mercury retrogrades, it's a good time to slow down, not push forward in terms of communication, writing, ideas, travel. Really just, if you are having to travel in some way, just know it's going to take probably longer, or that miscommunication is more likely. And being in that airy sign of Aquarius may, I got this image as I was thinking about this particular Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, of someone taking a paperweight off a stack of papers and the wind just blowing through and all the papers going scattering everywhere. Like, that's probably but what this Mercury retrograde is going to be like in the air sign, because that's very much the nature of Mercury retrograde. You have to go back over things. You have to go find the papers that got scattered in the wind. Your thoughts might be all over the place. So as best you can, plan for that Mercury retrograde. I always use Mercury retrogrades to do editing and to answer old emails, deal with bills, anything that you have to go back to. And while I'm not the type of person who would say, don't sign a contract under Mercury retrograde, do reread it 10 times. So that kind of thing. There have been very successful contracts signed or publications made under Mercury retrograde. So it's not cursed, but just be careful. And you actually might have a better outcome by being careful. So that's what's going on with Mercury. And then finally, I just want to conclude with Venus's dance through all of these same planets that the sun moved through, and give you those dates. So Venus will conjoin Pluto on January 28th. As I mentioned, that's the same day as the Leo full moon and the sun conjunct Jupiter. And so that Venus-Pluto energy is really that kind of rich, sensual, edgy, taboo, Janis Joplin singing "Take Another Little Piece of My Heart" kind of quality. Venus conjunct Saturn comes just a few days later on February 5th. And Venus-Saturn is more the heartache, heartbreak even. There can be a kind of, on the one hand, Venus-Saturn can be very bittersweet, but it can also be that sense of like lasting commitment until death do us part, that kind of quality. As a friend of mine says, when you think of Venus-Saturn, or you think of relationship in general, all relationships end either in heartbreak or death. And that's a Venus-Saturn perspective on the world. But immediately within hours, following that exact Venus Saturn conjunction, we get a Venus Uranus square. So there's a lot of tension there. Um, just like the sun highlighting or Jupiter highlighting the Saturn Uranus tension, when Venus comes in, there may be, on the one hand, this kind of pull toward like relational security, and on the other hand, the desire for something new and exciting and innovative. That can show up in terms of relationship tensions, especially romantic ones, or friendship, but it can also just show up in your aesthetic taste. Um, Venus Saturn is more like classical beauty or a simplicity in style or dress, dressing in all black or something like that, something very stoic. Whereas Venus Uranus is that wild hat with, birds and fireworks going off on it. And you might end up wearing both on that day. So that'll be interesting to feel into, and see all the various ways that it gets expressed. And then finally, concluding all of this, the same day as the Aquarius new moon, Venus conjoins Jupiter. And I feel like this is such a beautiful ending to the Venus story of moving conjunct Pluto, conjunct Saturn, square Uranus. And then finally, Venus conjunct Jupiter, not only conjunct Jupiter, but at the Aquarius new moon. Venus Jupiter is the open, generous heart. It's the indulgence in luxury and opulence. It's, you know draw yourself a bath, fill it with rose petals and essential oils, eat chocolates with diamond rings on your fingers, and imagine what artwork you would buy if you had an unlimited budget. Indulge in romantic fantasy of any kind. Like, that's Venus Jupiter. And just the fact that there will be a Venus Jupiter conjunction at the next new moon indicates, well, that's what can become part of the seeding of the next cycle, those next new moon intentions.